The people who ignore you today may be the same people applauding you tomorrow. Rachel Parker heard the laughter drifting across the street as she pulled into the driveway of the smallest house in Willow Creek Estates. The neighborhood was known for its beautiful homes, perfectly trimmed lawns, and residents whose success seemed visible in every luxury vehicle parked outside their garages. Rachel's small rental home looked modest beside the surrounding properties, but it was the best place she could afford for herself and her 9-year-old son, Ethan. Every morning, she woke before sunrise, prepared breakfast, packed lunches, and worked tirelessly to provide a stable life for her child. She did not have a high-paying job. She did not attend exclusive social gatherings. She did not belong to the same social circles as most of her neighbors. Yet she carried herself with quiet dignity and never complained. That evening, as she unloaded groceries from her car, several neighbors gathered across the street for a backyard get-together. Rachel recognized many of them. Olivia Grant lived in one of the largest homes on the block. Rebecca Foster organized most of the neighborhood events. Charles Whitmore was a successful attorney whose family seemed to know everyone important in town. Rachel offered a polite smile when their eyes briefly met. None of them smiled back. It was not open hostility. It was something subtler. They simply looked through her as if she were part of the background. Rachel had grown accustomed to it. During the year she had lived there, invitations never arrived. Conversations rarely lasted more than a few seconds. Most of the residents seemed to assume she had little in common with them. Ethan stepped onto the porch carrying a grocery bag. "Mom, are they having another party?" Rachel glanced across the street. "Looks like it." Ethan nodded. "Do they ever invite us?" Rachel forced a small smile. "Maybe someday." The truth was that she no longer expected it. After dinner, she helped Ethan with homework while listening to him talk about school. Those moments mattered more than neighborhood approval ever could. Still, when Ethan went to bed later that night, Rachel sat alone near the living room window and watched the lights from the larger houses glowing outside. For a brief moment, she wondered what people saw when they looked at her. A struggling single mother. A renter. Someone who did not quite belong. The thought disappeared as quickly as it arrived. Rachel had learned long ago that self-worth could not depend on other people's opinions. The next morning, she followed her usual routine. She dropped Ethan at school and headed to work. Along the way, she stopped to help an elderly woman load groceries into her vehicle. Later, she assisted a co-worker who was overwhelmed with tasks. None of these actions felt extraordinary to Rachel. Helping people was simply part of who she was. What she did not realize was that while many of her neighbors barely noticed her existence, someone else was about to notice exactly who she was. And before long, the woman living in the cheapest house on the street would find herself on a path that none of those neighbors could have imagined. Over the following weeks, life in Willow Creek Estates continued much as it always had. Every Saturday morning, neighbors gathered for coffee meetups, gardening clubs, and informal social events that seemed to include nearly everyone except Rachel Parker. She rarely complained about it, but the pattern had become impossible to ignore. Invitations circulated from house to house. Group messages filled community forums. Photos from neighborhood gatherings appeared online. Somehow, Rachel always learned about these events after they happened. One Saturday afternoon, she noticed several families setting up tables and decorations in the community park located at the center of the neighborhood. Children ran between colorful banners while adults laughed and carried trays of food. Ethan watched through the front window. "That looks fun," he said. Rachel followed his gaze. "It does." Ethan turned toward her. "Did we forget about it?" Rachel hesitated for a second before answering. "No, sweetheart. I do not think we were invited." Ethan nodded quietly. He was old enough to understand more than she wished he did. "That is okay," he said. "We can do something else." Rachel smiled proudly. His kindness reminded her so much of the person she hoped he would become. Instead of dwelling on disappointment, they packed a picnic lunch and drove to a nearby lake. The afternoon turned into one of their favorite days together. They walked along nature trails, skipped stones across the water, and laughed about stories Ethan invented along the way. Moments like that reminded Rachel that happiness did not require approval from anyone else. Yet the contrast remained impossible to ignore. Back in Willow Creek Estates, people seemed eager to connect with one another, but Rachel often felt invisible. A few days later, she attended a homeowners information meeting regarding upcoming community projects. Even though she rented her home, residents were welcome to participate. Rachel arrived early and found a seat near the middle of the room. Around her, conversations flowed easily among neighbors who had known one another for years. Several people passed by her table without acknowledgement. Others offered brief nods before continuing conversations elsewhere. Rachel focused on the meeting itself. When discussions turned toward improving local programs for families and children, she raised a thoughtful suggestion about creating affordable after-school activities. The idea was practical and well received by the meeting organizer. Yet moments later, another resident repeated a similar suggestion and received enthusiastic praise from the room. Rachel noticed the difference but remained silent. Recognition had never been her motivation. Still, the experience reinforced something she already knew. People often listen more carefully to certain voices than others. After the meeting ended, Rachel gathered her notes and prepared to leave. As she walked through the parking lot, she noticed a man standing beside a dark blue vehicle, studying several community flyers. He appeared confident but approachable, dressed neatly without attracting attention. Their eyes met briefly, and unlike most interactions Rachel experienced in the neighborhood, this stranger smiled warmly. It was a simple gesture, nothing dramatic. Yet for some reason, it felt different. Rachel smiled back before continuing toward her car. She had no way of knowing that the stranger had already noticed something about her that many of her neighbors had completely overlooked. The stranger from the parking lot remained in Rachel's thoughts for only a few moments before life returned to its usual rhythm. There were lunches to prepare, work schedules to manage, and endless responsibilities waiting at home. Like most single parents, she rarely had time to dwell on brief encounters. Her focus remained on providing stability for Ethan and making the most of every opportunity available to them. Over the next several weeks, Rachel continued doing what she had always done. She volunteered at Ethan's school when extra help was needed. She organized donated supplies for a local family resource center. She spent evenings helping elderly residents carry groceries or assisting neighbors with small tasks whenever they asked. What made these actions remarkable was not their scale, but their consistency. Rachel never helped because she expected recognition. In fact, most people never noticed. One afternoon, while walking home from the community center, she spotted a stack of flyers scattered across a sidewalk after a sudden gust of wind. Several pedestrians stepped around them without stopping. Rachel immediately bent down and began gathering the papers. A few moments later, another pair of hands appeared beside her. "Looks like you got here before everyone else," a familiar voice said. Rachel looked up and recognized the man from the parking lot. "Looks like you did too," she replied with a smile. Together they collected the remaining flyers. Once everything was organized, the man introduced himself. "Michael Harrison." Rachel shook his hand. "Rachel Parker." Something about Michael felt easy to talk to. Unlike many people she met in Willow Creek Estates, he seemed genuinely interested in listening. Their conversation lasted only 10 minutes, but it covered far more than casual small talk. Michael asked thoughtful questions about the community, local programs, and the needs of working families. Rachel shared observations based on her experiences, volunteering and raising Ethan. The more she spoke, the more attentive Michael became. Several times he asked follow-up questions that suggested he valued her perspective. That alone felt unusual. Most people seemed surprised when Rachel offered ideas. Michael seemed surprised only by how insightful those ideas were. Before leaving, he thanked her for the conversation. "You know this community better than most people I have spoken with," he said. Rachel laughed softly. "I doubt that. I do not." His answer was immediate. "You pay attention to things other people miss." The comment stayed with her long after they parted ways. During the following days, she occasionally encountered Michael at community events and public meetings. Each interaction felt natural. He listened more than he talked. He never seemed concerned with appearances or social status. Most importantly, he treated Rachel as though her opinions mattered. That simple respect stood in sharp contrast to many experiences she had grown accustomed to in the neighborhood. Meanwhile, life in Willow Creek Estates continued as usual. The same social groups gathered together. The same residents remained at the center of attention. Rachel remained largely unnoticed. Yet without realizing it, she had already attracted the attention of someone whose opinion would soon matter far more than she could imagine. While many neighbors continued overlooking the woman living in the smallest house on the street, Michael Harrison had begun recognizing something far more valuable than wealth, and the consequences of that recognition were about to change everything. As autumn settled over Willow Creek Estates, Rachel's life followed a familiar pattern of responsibilities, volunteer work, and evenings spent with Ethan. Yet one thing had changed. Michael Harrison continued appearing at community meetings, local projects, and neighborhood activities, and each encounter led to longer conversations. What surprised Rachel most was not that he spoke with her. It was that he listened. One evening, after a community planning session, Michael invited her to join him for coffee at a small cafe near downtown. Rachel almost declined. Out of habit, her schedule was already crowded, and she was not accustomed to people seeking her company. But something told her to accept. During that conversation, Michael asked about her experiences in the neighborhood. Rachel answered honestly without sounding bitter. She explained how difficult it could be for working families to access resources. She spoke about the challenges faced by single parents. She described opportunities the community often overlooked. As she talked, Michael occasionally took notes on a small pad of paper. Rachel laughed when she noticed. "Are you grading me?" she joked. Michael smiled. "Not at all. I am learning." The answer seemed simple, yet completely sincere. Over the following weeks, Michael introduced her to several people involved in local nonprofit projects and community development programs. At first, Rachel assumed he was simply making connections. Then she noticed something unusual. Many of these individuals already knew who Michael was. More importantly, they treated him with remarkable respect. Whenever he entered a room, conversations shifted. People sought his opinion. Leaders listened carefully when he spoke. Rachel began wondering if there was more to Michael than he casually revealed. One afternoon, that suspicion grew stronger. She arrived early for a meeting at a regional community center and noticed Michael speaking with a group of executives. Their discussion appeared important, and several people referred to him as chairman. Rachel quietly took her seat without interrupting. Later, after the meeting ended, she finally asked the question that had been growing in her mind. "What exactly do you do?" Michael laughed softly. "That sounds like a question I should have answered a long time ago." He explained that he had built several successful companies and now dedicated much of his time to philanthropy, community investment, and leadership initiatives. Rachel stared at him. "You never mentioned any of that. You never asked." "Most people would have mentioned it immediately." Michael nodded. "That is exactly why I did not." The answer reminded her of something she admired. He cared far more about character than status. As their friendship continued developing, Michael became increasingly interested in Rachel's ideas. During discussions about community improvement projects, he often encouraged her to share suggestions. More than once, those suggestions were adopted because they addressed problems others had missed. Rachel still viewed herself as an ordinary single mother trying to build a better future for her son. Michael seemed to see something very different. One evening, as they finished reviewing plans for a local family outreach initiative, he leaned back and studied her thoughtfully. "Rachel, have you ever considered leading a larger project?" Rachel laughed immediately. "You are talking to the wrong person." Michael shook his head. "I do not think I am." His confidence caught her off guard. Then he handed her a folder containing information about a major community initiative that would soon attract attention across the entire region. As Rachel opened the folder, she had no idea she was looking at the first step toward becoming the most talked about person in Willow Creek Estates. Rachel carried the folder home that evening and placed it on her kitchen table after Ethan had gone to bed. For several minutes, she simply stared at it. The proposal outlined an ambitious regional initiative designed to support working families, improve access to educational resources, and connect local communities with practical programs that could create lasting change. It was exactly the kind of work Rachel cared about. Yet one detail continued standing out. Michael wanted her involved in a leadership role. The idea felt almost impossible. She had spent years being overlooked. Now someone was asking her to help guide a project that would affect thousands of people. The following morning, she reviewed the material again before work. The more she read, the more excited she became. Many of the challenges described in the proposal reflected problems she had personally experienced or witnessed firsthand. She understood the concerns because she had lived them. Later that week, Michael arranged several meetings with community leaders connected to the initiative. Rachel attended expecting to remain in the background. Instead, she found herself contributing ideas throughout every discussion. To her surprise, people listened carefully. Several participants even wrote down her suggestions. After one meeting ended, a program director approached her. "That recommendation about family outreach was excellent," he said. Rachel thanked him politely, but remained slightly stunned. She was still adjusting to the unfamiliar experience of having her voice valued. Over the next few months, the project began gaining momentum. Rachel dedicated evenings and weekends to helping develop plans, coordinate resources, and identify community needs. She balanced the additional responsibilities with work and parenting, often sacrificing free time to make everything fit. Yet she never complained. The work felt meaningful. For the first time in years, she sensed that her experiences were being transformed into something useful. Meanwhile, life inside Willow Creek Estates remained largely unchanged. Olivia Grant continued hosting social gatherings. Rebecca Foster organized neighborhood events. Charles Whitmore remained one of the community's most influential residents. Few of them knew much about Rachel's growing involvement in the regional initiative. If they noticed her at all, they still saw the same quiet single mother living in the smallest house on the block. Rachel preferred it that way. She had never been interested in impressing anyone. One afternoon, while helping prepare materials for an upcoming planning session, she overheard two volunteers discussing the initiative. "Who is coordinating most of this?" one asked. "Someone named Rachel Parker," the other replied. "Apparently, she has become one of the key people behind the project." Rachel smiled quietly and continued organizing documents without introducing herself. Recognition remained far less important than results. As winter approached, preparations accelerated. The initiative was scheduled to be formally launched during a major regional event that would attract business leaders, public officials, nonprofit organizations, and community representatives from across the state. Michael remained heavily involved, but increasingly, he encouraged Rachel to take the lead during meetings. Her confidence grew with each responsibility she accepted. What she did not know was that conversations about her were already beginning to spread beyond the project itself. People were asking questions. Who was Rachel Parker? Where had she come from? Why was her name appearing in so many important discussions? The answers remained surprisingly unknown to many. Back in Willow Creek Estates, whispers of curiosity had started circulating among neighbors who had barely acknowledged her existence before, and those whispers were about to grow much louder. Rachel remained focused on the work itself, paying little attention to the growing curiosity surrounding her name. Every week brought new responsibilities connected to the regional initiative. Community organizations joined the effort. Educational programs expanded. Partnerships formed between groups that had rarely collaborated before. What began as a promising idea was steadily becoming a reality, and Rachel found herself at the center of countless planning sessions. Despite the increasing visibility of the project, she continued living exactly as she always had. She drove the same reliable vehicle. She lived in the same modest rental home. She spent evenings helping Ethan with homework and preparing for the next day. Success had not changed her priorities. If anything, it had reinforced them. Meanwhile, conversations throughout Willow Creek Estates started becoming noticeably different. During neighborhood gatherings, residents occasionally mentioned the regional initiative. Articles about its progress appeared in local publications. Community newsletters highlighted several achievements. More than once, Rachel's name appeared in those reports. At first, few people connected the name in the articles with the quiet single mother living nearby. Then the realization slowly began spreading. One afternoon, Rachel was trimming plants near her front porch when Rebecca Foster walked across the street toward her. The interaction immediately felt unusual because Rebecca had rarely spoken more than a few words to her before. "Rachel," Rebecca said, with an awkward smile, "I read something about you in the local paper." Rachel looked up. "Oh, you are involved in that regional project everyone keeps talking about." Rachel nodded. "A little." Rebecca laughed softly. "From what I read, it sounds like a lot more than a little." After a brief conversation, Rebecca returned home. Rachel did not think much about it. Yet similar encounters continued happening over the following weeks. Neighbors who once seemed indifferent suddenly became more interested in talking. Some asked questions about the project. Others expressed admiration for the work being done. A few seemed surprised that someone they barely knew had become involved in something so significant. Rachel treated everyone kindly, but she noticed the change. The difference was subtle yet undeniable. One evening, Michael met her after a planning session and asked if she had noticed the attention. Rachel smiled. It is a little strange. How so? The same people who barely knew my name suddenly want conversations. Michael nodded knowingly. Success has a way of changing what people notice. Rachel thought about that statement during the drive home. She did not feel angry toward anyone. If anything, she felt grateful. The project was helping real families. That mattered far more than social recognition. Still, she understood what Michael meant. Many people had judged her based on assumptions rather than reality. As winter turned into spring, preparations began for the official launch celebration. It would be one of the largest community events in the region, attended by business leaders, public officials, nonprofit executives, and residents from dozens of communities. The event promised to receive significant media attention. Rachel expected to spend most of the evening working behind the scenes. That assumption seemed perfectly reasonable to her. After all, she had spent much of her life operating quietly in the background. What she did not know was that Michael and several other leaders had already made a decision. When the night of the celebration arrived, the spotlight would not be focused on executives, investors, or public officials. It would be focused on Rachel Parker, and the entire neighborhood was about to witness a side of her they had never truly seen before. The weeks leading up to the launch celebration passed faster than Rachel expected. Every detail of the initiative required attention. Schedules had to be coordinated, presentations finalized, and community partners organized. The closer the event came, the more obvious it became that the project was attracting attention far beyond the local area. Regional organizations began discussing it as a model for future programs. Local newspapers published feature stories. Community leaders praised the collaboration that had made it possible. Through it all, Rachel remained focused on the mission rather than the recognition. Yet recognition continued finding her anyway. In Willow Creek Estates, curiosity had evolved into genuine fascination. Residents who had spent years overlooking her now seemed eager to learn more. Some stopped by while walking their dogs. Others approached her during community meetings. Even Olivia Grant, who had once barely acknowledged her presence, struck up conversations whenever they crossed paths. One afternoon, Rachel returned home from work and found Ethan waiting on the front porch with unusual excitement. "Mom, you were in another article," he said, holding a printed newspaper. Rachel laughed. Again, Ethan pointed proudly to a photograph accompanying the story. "My teacher saw it." Rachel looked at the article and felt slightly embarrassed by the attention. The piece highlighted the initiative's progress and included comments from several project leaders praising her contributions. What caught her attention most was not the praise itself, but Ethan's expression. He looked proud, not because his mother was becoming well known, but because he knew how hard she had worked. That evening, after dinner, Ethan asked a question. "Do you remember when nobody talked to us much around here?" Rachel smiled. "I remember. Why do people act different now?" Rachel considered the question carefully. "Sometimes people need time to see things that were there all along." Ethan nodded thoughtfully. "You mean like when someone looks at a puzzle and does not see the picture right away?" Rachel laughed. "Exactly like that." A few days later, Michael invited Rachel to review the final event schedule. The celebration would take place at one of the largest venues in the region. Hundreds of guests were expected to attend, including business executives, nonprofit leaders, elected officials, and community representatives. As they reviewed the program, Rachel noticed something unusual. Several details regarding the evening's closing presentation were missing. "I think part of the schedule is incomplete," she said. Michael glanced at the page and smiled. "That part is being handled separately." Rachel accepted the explanation without pressing further. She assumed it involved logistics or last-minute adjustments. What she did not realize was that her own name appeared prominently in the section she could not see. Back in the neighborhood, anticipation surrounding the event continued growing. Many residents planned to attend. Some were curious about the initiative itself. Others seemed interested in seeing how Rachel fit into a gathering that included so many influential people. As the date approached, conversations about the event became impossible to avoid. Yet Rachel remained remarkably calm. She expected to spend the evening supporting presentations, greeting guests, and celebrating the success of the project. Nothing more. She had no idea that by the end of that night, every person from Willow Creek Estates attending the event would be looking directly at her. And for the first time since moving into the neighborhood, nobody would be able to overlook Rachel Parker again. The evening of the celebration arrived with a sense of excitement that could be felt throughout the entire region. The venue sparkled with elegant lighting, beautifully arranged displays, and hundreds of guests representing businesses, nonprofit organizations, schools, and community groups. Rachel arrived early, just as she always did, determined to make sure everything ran smoothly. She wore a simple but elegant navy blue dress and carried herself with the same quiet confidence that had guided her through every stage of the project. Ethan accompanied her and could barely contain his excitement. The moment they entered the venue, Rachel noticed several familiar faces from Willow Creek Estates. Olivia Grant stood near one of the reception areas speaking with guests. Rebecca Foster chatted with community leaders. Charles Whitmore was engaged in conversation with several local officials. For the first time since moving into the neighborhood, many of those same people greeted Rachel warmly. She responded politely, although the sudden change still felt unfamiliar. Throughout the evening, presentations highlighted the progress of the initiative. Speakers described new educational programs, expanded family resources, and successful partnerships that had already begun improving lives across multiple communities. Rachel sat near the side of the stage, content to remain out of the spotlight, while others shared updates. Whenever someone praised the project, she thought about the countless volunteers and workers who had contributed behind the scenes. In her mind, the success belonged to everyone. As the event moved toward its conclusion, Michael stepped onto the stage to deliver the final remarks. The room quickly grew quiet. His reputation alone commanded attention, but there was also a sense that something important was about to happen. Michael thanked sponsors, community leaders, volunteers, and organizational partners. Then his tone shifted. "Before we conclude tonight," he said, "there is one person whose contribution deserves special recognition." Rachel smiled politely and assumed he was preparing to acknowledge a program director or senior executive. Michael continued, "This individual never asked for attention. She never sought recognition. In fact, many people in this room have no idea how much of this initiative exists because of her vision, leadership, and dedication." Rachel felt a strange sensation in her stomach. Around the room, guests looked at one another curiously. Michael paused before speaking again. "Rachel Parker, would you please join me on stage?" For a moment, Rachel simply stared at him. Ethan's eyes widened beside her. The audience immediately began applauding. Surprised and slightly overwhelmed, Rachel made her way toward the stage. As she stepped into the spotlight, she noticed something remarkable. Nearly everyone from Willow Creek Estates was watching. The same neighbors who once barely acknowledged her existence now looked genuinely astonished. Michael spent the next several minutes sharing stories about Rachel's contributions. He described her ideas, her commitment, and the countless hours she had invested helping families she would never personally meet. He explained how many of the initiative's most successful programs had originated from her observations and recommendations. The applause grew louder with each example. By the time Michael finished speaking, the entire audience had risen to its feet. Rachel stood there speechless as hundreds of people celebrated accomplishments she had never expected anyone to notice. Looking out across the room, she caught sight of Olivia, Rebecca, and Charles. Their expressions were not filled with pity, curiosity, or polite indifference. They were filled with genuine respect. And at that moment, Rachel finally understood that the woman many people had overlooked for years had become the person nobody could stop talking about. The standing ovation seemed to last forever. Rachel remained on stage, overwhelmed by an experience she never could have imagined when she first moved into the smallest house in Willow Creek Estates. As the applause gradually faded, Michael handed her the microphone. For a brief moment, she considered all the speeches she could give. She could talk about the initiative, the partnerships, or the accomplishments that had brought everyone together. Instead, she chose something much simpler. She thanked the volunteers who had dedicated countless hours to helping families. She thanked the organizations that believed positive change was possible. Most importantly, she thanked the people who often worked behind the scenes without recognition. "Many of the most important contributions come from people nobody notices," she said. "I know that because for a long time I felt invisible myself." The room fell completely silent. Her words carried a truth many people understood. When she finished, the audience responded with another round of applause, this time filled with admiration rather than surprise. The remainder of the evening passed in a blur of conversations and congratulations. Community leaders introduced themselves. Business executives praised her work. Public officials thanked her for her leadership. Yet the moments Rachel remembered most came from unexpected places. Olivia Grant approached her with genuine warmth. "I owe you an apology," she admitted. "I should have gotten to know you a long time ago." Rebecca Foster expressed similar feelings. Charles Whitmore congratulated her and admitted he had completely underestimated her. Rachel accepted each conversation graciously. She did not feel anger toward any of them. Holding on to resentment would have accomplished nothing. The truth was simple. They had finally seen the person she had always been. Later that evening, Rachel and Ethan stood outside the venue waiting for their ride home. The city lights reflected against the glass walls behind them. Ethan looked up at his mother and smiled. "I knew everybody would see how amazing you are someday." Rachel laughed softly. "You might be a little biased." "Maybe," Ethan said, "but I was right." His confidence touched her more deeply than any award or recognition ever could. A few days later, life returned to a more normal pace. Rachel continued working with community programs and supporting the initiative. She still drove the same vehicle. She still lived in the same home. She still spent evenings helping Ethan with school projects. On the surface, very little had changed. Yet something important was different. The neighborhood no longer viewed her through assumptions. People greeted her by name. They invited her to community gatherings. They listened when she spoke. For the first time since moving there, she felt fully seen. Months later, while walking through the neighborhood on a warm spring evening, Rachel passed the same homes that had once made her feel out of place. She realized something surprising. The grand event had not changed her life because it brought attention. It changed her life because it revealed a lesson she would never forget. True worth does not appear when people finally notice you. True worth exists long before anyone is paying attention. The recognition simply arrives later. As Rachel continued down the sidewalk toward home, she saw Ethan waiting on the porch. He waved excitedly, and she waved back. The future looked brighter than she had ever imagined. Not because she had become the center of attention, but because she had learned that character, kindness, and perseverance eventually shine brighter than status or wealth. And in the end, the woman who once felt invisible discovered that the most powerful thing she could ever be was herself.